Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Dr. Donna, who teaches people how to shift their mind in a moment. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. While you're there, you can sign up for a monthly email where I share the best articles I read this month, let you know about upcoming episodes, and share a little wisdom. You can also listen to coaching calls under the Coaching Calls tab. I also share the most interesting articles I read every week on Facebook at facebook.com/Richer Soul. And there's also a Facebook group where you can ask questions and interact with other listeners. Today's quote is from Marcus Aurelius. If you are pained by an external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your own judgment about it. And it's in your power to wipe out this judgment now. That's going to be the focus of our show today, shifting our mindset in a moment. But before we get there, I recently read The Talent Code. Greatness isn't born, it's grown. Here's how. At the core is creating the myelin sheath that fires the electrical impulses in our bodies that creates the movement of greatness. It's the perfect golf swing. The movement of a bow across the strings of a violin. It's creating those electrical pathways that allow this to occur and to occur with perfection, with greatness. The process requires ignition, the deep belief that you can be great, the practice of repetition, and a master coach to make small changes and continuously improve your actions. Over time, anyone can become great. The book is filled with stories of success from very unlikely places. When you build habits and you continue to do them, they become natural and automatic. The more you do it, the faster you can. Check out the book to learn more. I'm really excited about meeting our guest today. Dr. Donna Blevins is transparent and openly shares how you can shift your mindset in an instant. Dr. Donna is a high-profile, successful entrepreneur who could have lost everything in one life-shattering moment. Instead, she found the keys to controlling her mind and body. Instantly, she geared up and tested the limits of her mind-shifting exercises and proved they work. While moving from poverty to prosperity, Donna lost more often than she won. Even though it's admittedly more fun to win, Donna candidly shares her intimate story of turning losses into wins by accessing the wisdom within those mistakes. Donna built her self-confidence over time. Rather than submit to low self-esteem that comes from just not fitting in or losing, she learned how, and now she speeds up the process and will teach you how to kickstart your mindset and shift immediately. Let's meet our guest and learn how. Welcome to Richer Soul, Donna. It's great to have you join us today.
Rocky, thank you so much for having me on your show.
So we like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
I was raised in the mountains of Virginia in the coal mining camps. By standard, we were poor. However, I had no idea that we were poor. As far as I was concerned, we had plenty of money because we were about 15 miles from where my mother was raised, which was on a farm. And we would go there every week and we would get eggs and milk and vegetables. So there never seemed to be any want. And when I was 7, my grandmother and grandfather gave me a calf to raise. They wanted to teach me how to tend to a calf. And so I had a calf that every weekend I would go take care of the calf. And then the calf went to market. That's kind of difficult for a child, but that's what it was. It was the farm. Went to market, and the calf brought in $50, and I was given $25 because that was my share. Now, remember, this is in the 50s, and I earned $25. So I decided I was going to go put the money in the bank. So I went to our local bank, and I walked in, and by that time, I am taller than the average 7-year-old. And how at the bank, the place where you go is higher, and kids are kind of pulling themselves up. Well, I was just standing there, and I told them I wanted to open a charge account. Now, mind you, I'm 7. They said, no, Donna. They knew who I was because they're people from our church. And they said, you can't open a charge account here. We don't have charge accounts for someone your age. And I said, well, what do you have? They said, well, we have a checking account and we have a savings account. You probably want to start a savings account. I said, that's fine. Then I will open a savings account. And that was my first exposure to money.
That's an interesting story. And I think it's funny how generations change. Although in our area, there's still a lot of 4-H. So there are kids who actually still do that today. And they take it to market. And there's a big show that happens in town. I think it's usually around January. It's a big farm show. And that's literally what happens. The kids raise the animals and they essentially practically sleep with them half the time. And then it goes to market. So it's an interesting skill. I think it definitely teaches you a lot.
I think it has to do with grounding. You grounds you because you get down to the basics and you ground with Mother Earth. I think that helps in relationship to values and how you think about what you're caring for.
That's very true. So did you continue to do that or did you do something else as you became a teenager?
I would go to grandmother's virtually every weekend to help her. I didn't have another critter, as they called it, except I did raise a goose at one time. I had a goose egg and literally incubated it and raised a goose, and it became like a dog. It followed me around like a dog. And it was my goose. Her name was Wendy, by the way. And one of the dogs actually attacked her and broke her wing. Then she ended up being supper, and I fled to the barn and I hid in the loft for 3 days, and I wouldn't come out because my heart was broken.
Oh, that's such a sad story.
Yeah, I had to learn to let go, and it was tough learning how to let go. To deal with grief at that young it's the first time I really thought about that in those terms, but I guess I did deal with the grief and how to let go very early in life.
And you had another experience very early in life. You had essentially a near-death experience as a child. Can you share that story with us?
Thank you, I shall. It was actually before I got the calf. It was when I was 6 years old. I was in the first grade, and they discovered I had tuberculosis. And this was 1955, and anyone can do their math to determine how old I am today. And it was a different time. They were unsure what to do, but they did patches. They would do a patch to see who had tuberculosis, and mine came positive. So they did an operation to go in and get a biopsy. And it was a huge operation in those days, and there was so much infection around my heart that they took out my lower left lobe, and my heart stopped for 6 minutes. And when your heart stops for more than 4 minutes, they're determined that you will have brain damage. And people have said near death, but Rocky, it wasn't near. I was there, and it was in the light. I was no longer 6 years old. I was ageless. I was 142. I was completely aware. And when I had this feeling, it was almost like you're standing in a room and it's like you feel this force pulling you back. And I'm going, I don't want to go back. And I looked down and I'm looking at this shell where I had been. And I thought, well, that's just a body. The mind is the driver. And I didn't want to go back. But when I woke up, I was afraid to speak, because if I had shared my complete awareness and understanding, they would have, in 1955, they would likely put me in a mental hospital, a state mental hospital. And so I said nothing for 2 weeks, literally said nothing for 2 weeks. And they were convinced that I was brain damaged. And 2 weeks later, I thought, well, I better speak. And I said quietly, "What's for supper?"
That's a very interesting story. So how did that change your outlook on life?
It had a tremendous impact, because with the awareness that I had at the age of 6, it's not that you have determination, it's just you're aware. And I was afraid to mention it to anyone until I was 16, 10 years later. And I did, and it was in a religious setting. They didn't make anything big out of it. But it's like the hormones kicked in. And even though I had this awareness, it was like I spent the next 40 years making mistakes. And I kept wondering, why am I doing that? And it seems that where I am today, because I love where I am today, Rocky, regardless of everything that I have experienced, all the mistakes I have made, all the bad things I've done along the way. I love who I am and where I am today. And the only way I can be me is to have experienced that. And over the years, I thought, well, when I started coaching, I thought somebody starts talking about things that are going on, I can usually say, oh, I've been there, done that. Now let's figure out how we could fix it. Because I guess what it is that I wanted to have all those different experiences so that I could understand where people are coming from.
And that's true. Life is happening for us, not to us. And it's from those experiences that we learn. And it's from that learning that we can then help others. It's not always a perfect journey. And I think you even say that, life is a journey full of twists and turns, complete with potholes, roadblocks, traffic jams, dead ends, and freeways. And you say your body is the vehicle and your mind is the driver. And we kind of got a little bit of a taste of that from the story you told. Can you expound on that?
It's how we think that determines our life. We have the ability to change our thoughts in a mere moment, because our perspective, our reality is created by what we think. It amazes me still how there is a link between our mind and our body and our soul. We have this interconnected link that it's continually flowing. And when we change the way we think, we can change our reality, because we change our perspective, regardless of what's happening around us. It's our perspective. I've oftentimes thought that if I could take a look, and if like everyone has this bubble around them that is their reality, and I thought if we had this ability to go, excuse me, please, can I see life from your standpoint? If we started looking at everybody's perspective, we would see that this world is more like a science fiction than a reality.
It's true. We all live in bubbles, and everyone's bubble's different. And, within your little world, you create a bubble, and most of the people in your bubble are very similar to you. And when you start meeting people outside your bubble, that's when things get a little crazy for a lot of people. I talk about the lens, and we all looked at a situation through a particular lens, but there are 360 degrees of view to that lens, and we're only looking at it from our 1 degree. When we start to look at life from all those other different perspectives, as you speak about, it dramatically shifts. So I know you have a very interesting story. You've kind of touched a little bit on how tall you are. Can you share a little bit about how tall you grew to? And then, as always, tall people have a basketball story. So I'm sure you've got a great one.
Well, I am 6 feet 5 inches tall. And when I got to high school, and by the way, my high school is grade 8 through 12. In those days, there was no junior high. High school was 5 grades. if I fail to preface this story saying that, and I said I was in high school for 5 years, people will go, "Oh, she's slow." So I want to start the story by saying I was in high school for 5 years. When I got to high school in the 8th grade, I was already 6 feet tall. I had grown 9 inches in the 5th grade. And that's a terribly painful to grow that fast, physically painful, because your bones grow. When your bones grow that fast, your muscles and tendons are literally ripping away. And so going in the 6th grade, they actually put me in elevated shoes to take the pressure off of the Achilles tendon that goes up the back of the leg. So when I got to high school, my brother, who is 2 years older than me, he was an athlete. He was a star. He was good at basketball and baseball and football. And when I got to high school, his basketball coach came and said, "Donna, do you know how to play basketball?" And I said, "No, sir, I don't." And he said, "Would you like to learn?" And I said, "Not particularly." Because of that fast growth, I was completely uncoordinated. Because when you grow that fast, think about it. You reach for a doorknob and it's moved. You go to sit down on a toilet and it's further than it was a minute ago. Things were simply out of balance. And in those days, in the 60s, there was no girl sports. It was before Title IX in 1971 or 72, which was the trigger for having girl sports. So he came back 2 weeks later, the coach did, and he said, "Donna, we have your team." So they formed a team when I was in high school, a girls' team. During those 5 years, I played basketball, and I was such a poor basketball player. I couldn't dribble because, as I mentioned, I was uncoordinated. I did a double-handed overhead shot, and I would plant my feet. I would hold my hands over the head with the ball. Nobody could take it away from me. I would shoot, and I would miss, and I would shoot, and I would miss. I would shoot, and I would miss, and I'd shoot. Finally, I would score. After every game, I would say, "Why am I such a poor basketball player?" So let's fast forward 20 years to 1987. And I was blessed to be on a daytime talk show with Kareem AbdulJabbar, who is 7'2". And it was the Hour Magazine talk show with Gary Collins, who was, they said 6'2", but he was not that tall. He was more like 6 feet, but they like to stretch that a bit, and that's fine. But they needed someone that was between the two to be comfortable. In those days, I wore 3, 4, 5-inch heels, and I had a 4-inch heels on. And I walked into the green room before the show, and Kareem looked at me, and he asked the question that people ask. The number one question people ask me is, "Did you play basketball?" And I just related the story that I related to you, and he said, 5 years in high school. He said, "Well, what was your average over those 5 years?" And I shared it with him. And in that moment, he threw back his head and he started laughing with this booming voice. And I feel humiliated. My head bows down and I'm so ashamed. And he said, "Wait." He said, "Do you know Magic Johnson?" And I said, "Sure, I know who Magic Johnson is. He's a good basketball player." He says, No, he's not a good basketball player. He's a great basketball player. He has a 23-point average this year. And I said, "So what does that mean?" He said, "He's one of the best basketball players in the world." And I had one of those mind-shifting moments. I said, "Do you mean that my 36-point average over those 5 years meant that I was a good basketball player?" He said, "No." He said, "You were not a good basketball player." He said, "You were a star." And in that moment, I had a mega mind shift. I realized that I had been counting the number of times I missed rather than the number of times I scored.
And we all do that, don't we? We count the times we miss much more than we count the times we score. But at the end of the day, it's the scoring that counts. The missing is just practice. It's learning. It's the experience.
That's exactly true, because from our mistakes, we can glean lessons as long as we look at them differently. And over the years, I learned in my own poker game how to actually started in sales with my husband. We had a real estate company, and we would do sales. They called it debriefing in those days. After a sales call, we would look back. In those days, we'd say, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? What can I do differently? And then I realized that to get rid of the right and wrong, let's see if we can frame that differently, because how we ask ourselves questions determines that reality. And so I look back and I say, and this is the format that I work with my coaching clients and with my own game. What did I do correctly? Regardless of what happened, you must first look at what you did correctly. That changes the whole experience energetically. That changes the superstructure of it by asking, what did I do correctly? And then the second question, after you've thought about that and written it down, spoke it, however you're doing it. If you're doing it with someone else, if you're doing it yourself, and you're going to write it down, and be sure to write it down. It's critical to write these things down, because doing the process of journaling is extraordinarily therapeutic, because it gives you something concrete that you can look at. And the second question being, what might I have done differently? Rather than bringing the judgmentalness in of right and wrong, when you ask yourself, what might I have done differently? It's self-forgiving, and self-forgiveness is the most powerful principle that we overlook most of our lives. We are our own saboteur. We are so hard on ourselves. Give yourself some slack. Look back and say, what might I have done differently? Be forgiving of yourself. And then the third question is, what can I do right now? What's the next step I can do? Something small that I can do that I believe can make some changes, or I want to do a tweak, a simple change, rather than wholesale changes, one simple thing at a time.
And I think people don't understand the power of small, simple steps, because small, simple steps over time compound. And they compound massively. But if you don't take those teeny little small steps and continue to take them, you don't get the compound effect of them. And so that's why it's so important to do the little and just keep showing up and doing it.
After the book and the movie The Secret was published, there were people who would say, well, the law of attraction, that's fabulous. It's really working. And a lot of people are saying, no, that never worked. The missing piece had to do with the action steps. And I actually saw something recently published where the author said that it had been edited out of her book by editors. Whether that be the case or not, I'm glad to hear that she had it in there. Because I believe when we vision something positive that we want, and we see it and we feel it and we taste it, well, if we're going to sit here on a couch and just think about it, it's not going to happen. We have to sit and we have to get ourselves up. As my mother says, my mother is 92, and mother says, if you want to stay above the grass, you need to get your butt up and take action. That's exactly what she says. You have to take that actions and take those steps. Rather than make big goals, I think the important thing is to make something that you can do right now, something small, regardless of how big it is. The task, the overall task, you have to take those little bites. I mean, when you eat a meal, what do? One bite at a time. Sometimes we take bites that are too big, but it's a whole lot healthier if we take smaller bites and if we chew longer. So think about that in relationship to taking action and moving forward in life.
Do you know how to eat an elephant?
One bite at a time.
One bite at a time. That's correct. That's literally what life is. And it's just putting that into practice. I think too often people want to bring about massive change and then it overwhelms them. and then they give up. And that's the problem. But when we have small, accomplishable things and we continue to accomplish and we continue to win, we just create that winning atmosphere that we can continue to build upon and continue to do great things from.
I think that was one of the biggest lessons I took away from competing in the World Series of Poker Main Event Championship in 2007. And because it's an event that at that time was the largest event annually. This particular one had 6,400 players. But now think about that. You're going, I'm going to compete against that many players, but you're sitting down at the table with 8 or 9 other players. So the only competition you have is right there in front of you. So how do you get to the final table with an event that lasts for 15 days? It's one hand at a time. And it was actually poker that literally saved my life in 1996. My husband and I had a real estate company, and it was so chaotic. We're the management brokers for the Department of Veterans Affairs, and we took custody and maintained properties that the VA had acquired because of the foreclosure process in 5 counties in Southwest Florida. And if you can imagine taking custody of 257 properties in one day, how that might be overwhelming. I mean, we were working 17 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I was so overwhelmed. And poker actually was brought into the Seminole Indian bingo halls in 1996, and I saw it in our weekly newspaper. That's how tiny the town was in Southwest Florida where I lived. And I said to my husband, I need some time away from the office. Maybe would you teach me how to play poker, and maybe I can enjoy it, like some entertainment. And I could see the spinning wheels when you say something and somebody's going through all these thoughts, and I could just see him thinking, oh, it's a guy's game, But if I can teach her to play and she likes to play, well, who knows? I may be able to play more poker. I had no dislike to him playing the game, but there was no place for him to play. And I can remember the day when I'm sitting at the table, I'm in a hand, and I'm worrying about what had happened that day. I was worrying about what had happened a few days before with a contractor. I'm worried about the paperwork I have to do tomorrow. It was like the universe gave me this smack on the forehead and said, wait, there's only one thing you have control over. Only one thing. And that's how you play the hand you're in. That's it. And it was one of those big mind-shifting moments when I had that epiphany. I came to the mindfulness of realizing that that was the only thing I had control over. Everything else was non-existent. In that moment, I went into what they call in sports the zone, because everything around me that had been chewing on me faded. It was as if the only thing in my universe was at that table. It was mind-shifting and uplifting. And that's exactly what I experienced during the World Series of Poker Main Event Championship in 2007. I was able to pull back that feeling and was able to finish in the top 4 women out of 6,400 players. And it was a time when realizing it was every hand, rather than thinking, oh, I have so many people to beat. It's just one hand you deal with at one time.
And we've had quite a few poker players on as guests, and I think there's a lot of lessons that I've come to learn that poker can teach you. And on top of that, I just recently read an article about elite athletes, and that's literally what it talked about. An athlete becomes elite by being in that one moment, that one serve, that one pass, that one hit. It's in the moment that life happens. And I think from poker, what you learn is it's a mathematical game. So you learn mathematical expectancy, and investing comes off of that. Most people just don't do the math in life. When you learn to do the math in life, it's not going to say that the next card's going to be a king, but you learn the probability of what's about to happen next and whether it's a good probability or a bad probability, and then you can adjust for risk. And I think the second thing that poker teaches is human nature, how to read people, to see what they're doing. And I don't know if you have more insights into that or thoughts.
Well, poker certainly is a card game played by people, but it's most importantly a people game played with cards. And when you're looking at what lessons that you can learn from poker, one of the biggest takeaways that I've had, along with the mindfulness, has to do with giving yourself permission to fold. Because we have a tendency in life, as we do at the poker table, when we have a really, really good hand and we want to stay with that hand, but what happens is other cards come. And what we need to realize in life is when we want to stay with that hand because we know how good it is, things are going to change. They are always changing, and we must be willing to be in the flow and give ourselves permission to fold that hand regardless of what we have invested, because things change. Yes, we have to know the probability. It is a numbers game. You need to understand that. But at the same time, you need to have the courage to take a risk, and you also need to have the courage to go ahead and fold a hand that you think other people would never consider the probability. But there's something that tells you that it's okay. When you get that little voice that says, let it go, then let it go. The godfather of poker, Doyle Brunson, when he was asked if poker was an intuitive game, was it did someone have to be psychic? And he said, no. He said, I think what it is that when you see so many hands and you gather up this information, your subconscious actually has that information. And you make this conclusion, you have this feeling. The feeling is coming from what your subconscious is telling you. Because my viewpoint is that, Donna's viewpoint is that our subconscious mind is a perfect recorder. It simply is a lousy playback system. Because generally what is played back on a conscious level is oftentimes anchored with highly charged emotions. When we realize, when we get that feeling, when we get that little voice that says, let it go, then listen, let it go. It's our subconscious telling us that the hand is no longer a winning hand. And sometimes people say, well, they folded a hand that would have been a winning hand. If you never fold a winning hand, then you're playing too many hands. You're holding on too long.
And that's very true. I mean, I think in skiing, they said, if you're not falling, you're not learning. It's the same kind of thing. You've got to be able to get out there. And I just recently read an article that was about how certain pockets in certain areas create excellence. And it basically was along the lines of when you do things in repetition, and when you do things in repetition with failure involved, you start to build within your mind and within your body these neural pathways that go from being average to being great, because you're starting to understand the variations and how to deal with them. And life is full of variations. And when we can start to understand those and how they work and how they come together, it creates those pathways that takes you to a much higher level than is average, makes you extraordinary.
And when you bring up neuropathways, I must admit that I experienced rewiring my own neuropathways when I had a massive left brain stroke Halloween of 2013. And my book, Mindshift on Demand, I was under the impression that it was ready to go to editors, and I'm looking at the screen. I have this big flat screen TV attached to my laptop, and I'm standing up, and I have my I'm holding my hips like you would stand up and go, okay, I want this. And I said, I want something that proves my Mindshift exercises work. And I'm standing there demanding it. And I said, I want proof now. And I stomped my foot like a brat. And I must have kickstarted a clot, because a few moments later, I had a massive center left brain stroke, which is the part that controls your ability to speak. And as I'm falling down, and by the way, it felt like it took 20 minutes to hit the floor, but it was only a few split seconds, because when you have a stroke, time is distorted. When I hit the floor, the first thing I thought was, be careful what you ask for. Over the next few days, it was a mind-blowing, mind-opening experience, because all along the way, my husband and mother were able to get, my husband and my mother, who's 92, was able to get me to the emergency room at a local hospital, and they airlifted me to the University of Florida Teaching Hospital. And all along the way, the healthcare team is saying, she will never be able to speak fluidly again. If she can never speak, it'll be 8 to 9 months. And I have this internal remote control, that has only a few keys. It has delete or cancel, and some people may call that the same one. And then I have clear, because that's a different thought for me. And it might be fast forward or replay. I was able simply to detach from owning that and being in the midst of that disease. I could only say 2 words. I could only say Donna and crap. All along the way, whenever they tried to ask me something, I would trying to get the word out, and I would say crap, and they would laugh. They kept laughing. I started thinking about where my words are, and I started rewiring my neural pathways without ever knowing what I was doing. I'm saying, where are my words? I would ask that to myself. I would go look for the words. And the blessing is that within 3 days, when I pressed the call button on Sunday morning, the 3rd day, and the nurse came, and she came to the door, and she kind of shrugs her shoulders like, what do you want? And I said, hello, my name is Donna Blevins Weitzel. I'd like to talk about where you think I've been and where I have been. And she looked at me, her eyes got big, and she pulled back, and she turned around without ever saying a word, and she fled. And I thought, oh my goodness, did the words come out wrong? And it was a wonderful day, because I was able to speak fluidly, and there were dozens of teams that came by to see me that day, and they said it was a miracle. I believe that what happened is that I was in the process of taking action and asking, where are those words? And when I would start to see the word and I would tone them out, my husband shrink said what happened is that I was training my brain to rewire the neural pathways because of what they call neuroplasticity of the brain, something I have no idea of until then. But the way we think can actually change the wiring in our brain.
And that's very true. We can create new pathways. We can create new blood vessels to go around clots. Our body can do amazing things if we allow it to. And if we put the thought and the intention behind it. And I think these are some of the things that have kind of gotten lost over time because of modern medicine, which says, oh, there's the only way to do this is from an outside intervention. But yet everyone has heard of miracles that have happened. And the body does some pretty amazing things when you allow it to heal and when you allow it to work. And of course, you have to create the right atmosphere for the body, which is the right mindset. Without that, if you have the wrong mindset, your body's shutting down and not creating new pathways.
That's exactly correct, because most people will talk about their illness. On social media, you see people talking about how sick they are, and people start talking about, oh, that's so terrible, and that gives energy to it. When I had my stroke, I simply wanted to keep it a secret because I wanted to deal with the healing rather than having other people give that sympathy that seems to encourage or seems to inflame the disease rather than help you heal. I was only 2 of my coaching clients knew that I had had the stroke. They were very close to me. During my first live coaching call, one-on-one group coaching call 2 weeks after the stroke, I was in the process of, I had a misplaced word, and the word I was looking for was iceberg. I was talking about the difference in the mind, how the subconscious mind, how our mind is like an iceberg. Because the part that you do not see, the subconscious mind is like 95% of an iceberg. And the conscious mind is like that 5 or 10% that's above the water. And I'm on a conference call line, and there are 15 or 16 people on the line. And rather than saying, oh, what is that word I'm trying to think of? I thought, how can I do this? Rather than stress the fact that I feel broken, what I wanted to do was I wanted to find a way to locate a word. So I started explaining it. I said, your mind is like, one of those things that floats in very cold water and you only see a little bit of it. What do you think that is? They said, oh, that's an iceberg. And so I started saying the word iceberg. I wrote it down when they said it so I could see it and I could look at it. And I have a place on my left wrist that I actually tap with 2 fingers. It just happens to be my anchor point. Everyone should have an anchor point when you want to remember something, because we have the ability to anchor something and remember it by tapping someplace, by touching a part of our body, because the more physicality we bring into a memory process, the more a word or a thought is going to be anchored. Because when you give your brain more tasks to do simultaneously, more parts of the brain are working and they're active and they're activating. That's why when you add simple, subtle movements to mind-shifting thoughts, you're able to shift the way you think quickly. So today, more than 5 years after my stroke, periodically, in fleeting moments, I might come across a word that is elusive. And I have eliminated the word forget and forgot from my vocabulary. Those words are non-existent. In fact, I'm canceling those words because I said them. I'm only talking about them. And I've been in front of 350 people speaking. And I mentioned that if I should miss a word, are you okay with helping me find that word? People go, oh, sure, we'll help you. And I've actually missed a word. And I would say, okay, that word, what is the word that I am looking for? And the point I want to make is this. And I would explain it, and they help me find the word. It's a misplaced word that's missing in action, and now it's refiled back to its word file.
We will be back with our guest, Donna, in a moment. Did you see how the obstacle became the way for Donna? In spite of so many setbacks and issues in life, she goes right through them with a mind shift. What mind shift do you need to make to allow you to get through your obstacles? Maybe you can do this on your own like Donna did. However, if you're stuck and want help to take the next step in your business or life, that's where the power of a coach can propel you forward and create the action steps that allow you to eat your elephant. I offer a no-obligation free chat to see if we can help you through your obstacle and create your next steps. If you're ready to take action, reach out and schedule a short chat. It's Rocky@richyoursoul.com. Now back to our guest, Dr. Donna Blevins, and shifting our mindsets. So speaking of missing words, you are actually Dr. Donna Blevins. Would you share a little bit about your background from an educational standpoint?
Oh, thank you for asking that, because I've always thought I'm a product of educational cross-fertilization because I've been a life student. It took me 10 years and 5 different universities to get an undergraduate degree in advertising and graphic design. And then a lot of life passed, but I had a lot of different degrees along the way in different industries. In real estate, I had a CCIM, a Certified Commercial Investment Member, which in those days, when I got that in the in the 80s was a PhD in commercial real estate. But my PhD, the one that I have today, I actually went back to school in 2007. I mentioned that was when I competed in the World Series of Poker Main Event Championship. I think 2007 must have been a very significant year for me because I went back to school and I wanted to get a PhD in metaphysics. It has to do with the mind. Along the way, I ended up with 2 masters, one in metaphysics and one in performance spiritual psychology. And when I was at the age of 66, I got my PhD in metaphysical coaching, which I dearly love because it has to do with the mind, regardless of what you're doing, regardless of whether you're in sales, whether you're dealing with being a single parent, whether you're dealing with the loss of a loved one, whether you're competing in sports, whether you're a teen dealing with anxiety or the height of depression. It all has to do with shifting your mindset in the moment. That's a life skill that helps to ramp up the joy in our life and shift away from the darkness.
How do we do that in the moment? We've had a lot of guests on like yourself who've had life-altering moments that were kind of came to them, but without having to go through a life-altering moment, how do we create a mind shift on demand?
Thank you so much for asking that, because I believe that we can learn simple steps. I created in the book Mindshift on Demand, I actually included 12 Mindshift exercises that are different. They deal with different philosophies. And I had my coaching clients, my poker coaching clients, when I would say, all you need to do is shift your mindset, like you're saying, how do I do that? I'd say, well, just shift your mindset. And they'd go, please tell me how to do that. So I actually had to break things down to a simple steps because that's how I think. As an example, one that is my favorite, and I actually must have done this particular mind shift exercise more than 100 times in 3 days after I had my stroke. It's called, Isn't That Interesting? And when you're dealing with something that is stressful, that's causing you great trauma, you can bring that thought to mind. And when you do, you want to rate where you are with it. And when I say rate, it's just like a pain scale. 0's nothing, 10's terrible, take me to the ER. You want to rate where you are. Because just like you mentioned with poker, it's an analytical game. If we just want to think good thoughts without having something that can quantify it and give us some validation, we're not going to know how we're stepping through it. So when you start, you want to rate where you are with a thought, with an issue. And the thing of it is I always think it's better to bring up a person. If it's a situation, bring up a 3-dimensional figure, and bringing up a person seems to help. But rather than a place, because a place doesn't seem to be something you can see in your mind, because when you bring up that thought, you ask it to take form. And the reason that you want it to take form in your mind's eye, because when it's out there bothering us, it's all around us and consuming us. But when you ask it to take form, after you've rated it, put that number aside, then it's in your mind's eye and it's finite. It has boundaries. And wow, in that moment when you do that, think about that. Boundaries confine it. It's no longer out there and consuming you. And when you're doing that, you also want to take that step of self-forgiveness, because forgiving yourself for where you are is a huge part of any mind shift. By the way, it'll take about 2 minutes to walk you through this, just the steps, but you can literally go through this with a snap of a finger, or even saying, isn't that interesting? Because that's what we're going to do in just a moment. And that can be the trigger for your mind to go through 7 simple steps in a fleeting instant once you become accustomed to the procedure, to the process, to the exercise, the mind shift exercise. So you bring it to mind, and in your mind's eye, when you close your eyes and you look at it and notice it, and you step back 1 step from it. And as you're doing that, you're disconnecting from it. You're no longer fueling that, whatever that is. And you notice it. And then you say, isn't that interesting? You might say, isn't that amusing? Or, isn't that odd? Whatever words you want to use, and you can craft it the way that you want it because it becomes yours and your mind shift exercise, your techniques. Personalize it to you so that you can own it. And as you're looking at it, it's literally moving away. You've detached and it's moving away. It's getting dimmer. It's getting smaller. And you're doing this with your eyes closed. And then when you open your eyes, you look up and to the right. And then you pivot your entire body to the right. If you're sitting in a chair, swivel your chair to the right. If you're in a chair that doesn't move, move your legs to the right 45 degrees and continue looking up because you're accessing the right hemisphere of the brain, the creative part of the brain. And then you ask out loud to yourself, where would I rather be? And in that moment, it's unnecessary for you to answer it because you've given your subconscious mind a task, a subliminal task. You've given it a task to do. Where would I rather be? It can go about answering you, and as it does, you've actually downloaded code modifiers to your subconscious mind, and your subconscious mind will go about answering that. And when you finish that simple process, just rate how you feel about that. Give it a number again and look back at what the original number was. I've worked with veterans who are dealing with chronic pain, who have gone from an 8 to a 3 in those few moments and almost jumped out of their chair going, I've been on morphine and these narcotics, and this is just, I can do this with my mind. It's astonishing. I've dealt with young teens, this 15, 16, 17-year-old that dealing with anxiety, and they said, wow, wow, the stress, it's gone. I've had people go from a 10 to a 1, a 0 in a few moments. But if you happen to be at an 8 and you're still there, that's okay, because we're like an onion and we have to pull back those layers, and whatever you're looking at right now is different than what's really underneath, and that's okay. Just go ahead and bring up a situation that you're dealing with, go through the process. And what's happened is that I've had people come back to me 2 weeks later and say, Donna, that was absolutely fabulous, but it's no longer working. And I said, so how many times have you done it? And they said, well, I only did it that once. And I said, and how many showers have you taken since then? And it's just exactly like taking a bath or taking a shower. The mind shifting process needs to be done continually and daily. And I call it a 10-minute-a-day mind shift master plan. In my master class, I set up a 10-minute-a-day process because I believe everyone has 10 minutes a day to give to themselves. And that's what you need to do, is spend 10 minutes a day practicing mind shifting. So when you get into a crisis, your mind will already know how to do that without being reactive. You can be proactive.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's very true. It's just a handful of minutes a day can actually change your entire life. I think people think it's going to take hours and months and weeks. But as you said, these changes occur within minutes, but you need to keep repeating them, because doing something once is not going to give you massive results. Doing things constantly, a little bit at a time, over and over again, do give you those types of results.
They absolutely do.
And so you have some other techniques in the book, and I'd like to just kind of delve into a couple of those. There's one called the egg technique. What is that one?
The egg. A lot of my coaching clients says, why didn't you tell me about the egg to begin with? And I went, well, because we need foundational work first. The egg is a lovely process of self-protection because our largest organ in the body is our skin. But does our energy field stop at the skin? No. It's outside of us. And if you can, if you're standing in a room and someone walks up behind you and they're quiet, Rocky, have you ever felt someone there even though you didn't hear them?
Yeah, you can feel a presence. We all have an energetic field that we put off.
That's exactly right. And we don't know how far it is around you, but what you want to do is you want to protect that energy field Or else we get what I call energetic flu, because you're around people that are negative, and then you feel it. You be around people that are negative, and if you engage with them in a way where your fields are entangled, some of that darkness will get into your energy field. So you need to put a protective shield around your body. And I thought of it as an egg. And it's not an egg the shape of a hen's egg or a goose egg. It's your shape. So imagine, and it's flexible rather than being brittle. So imagine, some people have said it reminds them of a skin diving suit, but it's not right up next to your skin. It's out around your energy field, and it's reflective. It's a mirrored egg, and it's selectively reflective. It's reflecting only negativity and allowing the positive to come through it and to you. And when you put your egg on, and by even thinking about it right now, you have, whoever is in the sound of my voice has literally installed an egg. But I want you to know, just like a car, it requires maintenance. Because when we get upset about something, we kind of fracture that egg, and it needs to be healed. And in order to do that, when I first started the process, when I came across the egg, it was in the 70s, and I was trying to think my egg smooth. I'm going, I don't know how to do that. And my first process was, I said, well, what can I do? There's a crack in my egg. I could just see it. I got quiet, and I'm looking around the inside, and it's a crack. So I imagined that I could use shiny duct tape. Duct tape works for everything. You've seen that before. And I just went on the outside of my egg, and I would put duct tape, shiny duct tape, to cover it up, and then it would heal. But we can literally, all we need to do is to think about where it needs to be, what needs some maintenance. And when you could think about it, see it smooth, it can become smooth. But just a few moments of seeing that egg and seeing it protecting you, just a little bit of check-in will help to protect yourself. And it's a profound way of self-protection. I've used it in hospitals. I use it at the poker table all the time. Because when you're in a room with 200 tables and there's 2,000 people in hands, you can imagine the energetic fields. And if you are sitting there without being protected, you can get scattered and you can get fractured. Originally, I came in contact with this because I would go into a mall and I would get sick. I'd get a headache. And someone said, you need to protect your energy field. And when I thought, well, how does that work? And the concept came up in the 70s, and that's when the egg was born for me.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And another one that I kind of enjoyed reading about was toss the trash. Which trash, and what do you mean by that?
I call it head trash. It's all those negative thoughts that you have. I mean, how many times do you wake up in the middle of the night over the years and you're thinking thoughts about things that are causing you problems? I mean, I know we're on our mission to cleanse our mind and have a richer soul, but have you ever dealt with that, Rocky?
All the time.
Okay. Well, I would like to give you another gift right now before we get into the mind trashes. I want to give you 2 words. When you said all the time, I want you to know that when we say something like that, we've actually anchored the fact that I have it all the time, whatever that is. So when that comes out of your mouth, I want you to add 2 simple words at the end of that. When you hear yourself saying something like that, I want you to say, until recently. And what you've done is a code modifier to cancel what you've just said. So that's my gift to you, because I use until recently all the time. Because the head trash has to do with the thoughts that come up in the middle of the night. And that's where it originally came for me, because I would wake up and I was worrying about things. And I came across this room, and that's a magical room that it's in your head, and it's a fabulous room. And when I discovered it, it was on the 2nd floor of my home that I had in my mind. I walked into this room, and I want you to imagine walking into this room, and the room is completely clear. It's completely clean. There's nothing in the room on the floor. For me, it was an oak floor. It was beautiful. The walls were just beautifully painted. Everything was in perfect condition. It was calm. It was the perfect temperature when I walked into that room. At the far end of the room, there was a big window, and it was wide open. And to the right of that window was a roll of trash bags, black trash bags. And when I went over, I pulled out a trash bag and I opened it up and I said, "What is this for?" And when I opened it up, it was like I saw these thoughts come out of my head into the garbage bag. And I'm going, "Well, that's head trash." And I thought, okay, let's see, what other thought would I like to go in there? And I thought, well, let's put this thought in there. And I like just reaching up to my head and pulling out these thoughts and putting in the trash bag. And then take that trash bag and tie it up and toss it out the window. And when I did, it completely disappeared. Poof! It became totally neutralized. And that's what the head trash is. And it's a profound thing that I use. I still use head trash today. And it doesn't have to be at night when I'm going along and I've had a thought that I realize is counterproductive. I'm worrying about anything. When I start worrying, I go, wait a minute. Spend a moment. Let's go to the trash room. And I go to the trash room and I toss the trash. And it's a fabulous way to get those negative thoughts out of your mind. Just toss them.
And thank you for sharing that, because we all have these thoughts and nobody talks about them. And yet they're there, cluttering our minds, preventing us from the success that we want to have. And so it's nice to have these honest conversations and then have techniques that we can take action with immediately and clear out all the noise and the negativity so that we can focus on what's really important. Because at the end of the day, none of that stuff really matters. And yet we get stuck in those cycles. So we've covered a lot of different areas. Is there anything that we should have covered that I missed today?
Oh, don't should on yourself, Rocky. Should is one of those other words that is in my delete file. Oh, I don't know. I want everyone to engage in the process of mind shifting and pick up Mindshift on demand. The book site is at mindshiftoндemand.com, and I have a 4-minute audio of the isn't that interesting that you can download there. And then I'll notify you when the next masterclass comes up, because I mentioned I had created this 10-minute-a-day Mindshift master plan, because it takes 10 minutes a day, not an hour a day, of practice when you do something for 40 days, because it takes 40 days to anchor a habit. Remember talking about changing small habits or making small steps. And I believe that when we want to change a thing, we need to replace it with a positive habit. And that's the process of doing something 10 minutes a day for 40 days. And that's why I created the masterclass runs over a 6-week period to get people in the habit of going through the mind shifting process. And I created what I call subliminal tasks that are why questions that you download each day and use that why question during that day to help to rewire your neural pathways and to rewrite your underlying subconscious code, because our mind is controlled by software and we've programmed it all of our life. We do have the ability to rewrite it when we do it in a positive, appropriate way by downloading the proper code.
And that we do. And we've talked about taking action throughout this episode. What is one thing people can do this week to take action in their lives to make it better?
The one simple thing is to stop and take a breath. When you're in the midst of something that's giving you stress, just take a breath and notice the air as it goes into your lungs, and exhale through pursed lips. And just take a breath. In fact, if you put 3 breaths together, 3 simple breaths, you can do what I call a 90-second shift. And in the midst of whatever you are doing, just remember to breathe and to consciously breathe, because it is not only life-changing. In many instances, it has been life-saving.
Thank you for sharing that. If people would like to find you and connect, what's the best website or place for them to find you?
Go to mindshiftondemand.com, opt in there, and I'll be replying back to you, and I'll be broadcasting new Mindshift processes and where you can join me for complimentary webinars, because I do them periodically, because my intention is to share the process of mind shifting on demand with anyone that I can reach on a global scale, because I believe it can be that impactful. So it's mindshiftoндemand.com, and I am Donna Blevins, and I'm the 6'5" tall one, if you're wondering who I am.
And thank you so much for sharing. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Rocky, it's been wonderful having this conversation with you. Thank you so much for having me on.
I very much enjoyed the interview with Donna. She has a fascinating life story, and I really enjoyed learning about it and how she overcame obstacles. It's funny how much we can change when you change the lens that we look through life at. We will all have success and failure, and it's not a question of if we fall down, but what do you do when you are down? What's your plan, and how quickly can you get back to moving forward? This week's action step: take a breath, in the moment, just breathe. There's a lot that can be accomplished in that space of just sitting and thinking. It's where the magic happens. I incorporate time into my morning routines to do just that. If you're still listening, you must have liked this episode, so please share it with a few friends. And if you get a chance, leave a review. I'd appreciate that. You can also connect with me on Facebook. There's both a Facebook page and a Facebook group for Richer Soul. What's preventing you from moving forward, and who are you putting on your team to build a life you deserve? Taking no action creates a far worse outcome in life than trying something and failing. Can I or Donna help you achieve your goals through coaching and accountability? Just email one of us. See if we're a good fit for coaching. For many people, one session allows them to take a giant leap forward towards their dreams. You can always get me at rocky@richersoul.com. I'd love to hear how you're doing and how the information I've shared has helped. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.